Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM and this is Behind the Screen, an iconic production. We are here to discuss games, looking at role-playing games, board games, genres of fiction, all with the keen eye of a game developer's eye, and trying to get the most out of our games at the table. Hey, Phantom, good to see you. Grom and John Doom, as always, wonderful to have you here. We do have a new sponsor to the show, Strange Owl Games. Thank you for being a sponsor of the show. They've got a Space 1889 Patreon going right now. I should mention I am a member of Strange Owl, so this is self-promoting to a degree, but yeah, if you are interested in Space 1889, which dovetails kind of into our discussion today, it is a game of Victorian space fantasy, and that Patreon is live right now at Strange Owl, or patreon.com/Strange Owl Games, and the Kickstarter will be going live soon. So, Padre, good to see you here this morning. We're starting our brand new series on science fiction. We just concluded a massively long look at the different genres of fantasy, what elements they contain, what games best sort of mechanically reinforce this, and then how do we bring that experience of that genre to the table. And the chat, you guys voted on wanting to see science fiction. I think like 2 episodes into the fantasy series, you guys were like, hey, are you guys going to do science fiction? So I've been doing a lot of research, and we're going to dig into that. And we're going to start today with kind of a high-level overview, trying to define what science fiction is. And see you, Grom. Science fiction is our stories that take place in the future. So until next time, have a great... No, I'm just kidding. They are, but they're also more than that. Science fiction attempts to... If fantasy sort of looks at alternate worlds, past worlds, history, sort of this idealized view of magic and trying to recapture a mythic expression of our world. Science fiction looks to the future and tries to extrapolate out what this may be like. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Some science fiction ties us all the way back to Earth. Some science fiction is almost like fantasy, in which case it is a completely different universe from ours. Some science fiction has strange trappings, like the Safehold series by David Weber, where it's science fiction in the far future, but it's also sort of an age of sail story, as well as humanity has to kind of keep their technology leveled out. So science fiction is as broad of a genre as a fantasy, and we're going to cover a lot of different genres. We're going to kind of talk about that at the end of the show, what kind of our roadmap is for this. And again, if you're a member of the Iconic Patronage, you can see reading and movie lists, comic lists, and things that are going to be key to the discussions. And a lot of people have recommended some wonderful new series during our fantasy series to me that I can't wait to dig into. So I would say science fiction looks to the future. It looks at what will our future hold? What could our future hold? What are possible ways that humanity will go to the stars, will live among the stars? Possibly, I mean, if you're reading things like Foundation, even die among the stars, only to rise again. And there have been some really good fantasy games that have developed from there. And, the original granddaddy of these is Traveller, right? Traveller is sort of the quintessential hard science fiction role-playing game. And we'll get into that in a bit. Let's stay focused, Jam, on trying to define science fiction. Now, what's interesting about science fiction is that because it's generally rooted or grounded back to Earth, I think science fiction a lot more allows us to look at like Philip K. Dick kind of was a social science fiction writer. Let's make one change to society and sort of extrapolate out what is going on there. Genres like cyberpunk take us into the darkness of greed and the exploitation of humans and technology. Roddenberry's social science fiction postulates that maybe we can listen to the better angels on our shoulder, and maybe we can rise above the divisiveness and the flaws of our characters and build something better than ourselves. Modern Star Trek, not so much. We have genres like science fantasy, where we follow the third of Arthur C. Clarke's rules that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we have things like I would argue that in a lot of ways there are some deep science fantasy roots in the Warhammer 40K universe, as well as Star Wars, right? Star Wars is essentially space wizards in the future past, and that's awesome. So I thought we'd take an aside. So Clarke actually wrote 3 laws. Everyone quotes the third law: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But actually, it's the third of the laws. The first one being any elderly and distinguished scientist, when he says something is likely possible, is correct. Anytime he says something is impossible, he is wrong. And the only way to find out what is impossible is to go past what is possible. Or sorry, the only way to discover the limits of the possible is to step into the impossible by and seeing what happens. So Clarke, we have these foundational guys: Clarke, Asimov, Smith from the Lensman series. There's science fiction has this deep and abiding roots, really sort of in American literature, whereas a lot of the fantasy side of things really started in England, the UK, and Europe, which is sort of interesting to me. So, what are some common tropes of science fiction? So first of all, Padre, yes, Safehold is great. I have not finished it yet. I think I finished A Mighty Fortress. I'm really hoping that he moves even further down that line. Yes, Heinlein, Norton, these are kind of foundational. Bester, right? These are foundational authors to the genre. So, what can we expect from our view of science fiction? Well, everything will come back to technology. I had a friend of mine once said he could tell whether a story was science fiction or fantasy, usually because science fiction immediately starts talking about something shiny, while fantasy immediately starts talking about the trees. So, yes, we're going to talk about technology a lot. Cyberpunk is sort of near future. We're not that far in our future. What are the outcomes of kind of technology as we see it? We're going to see things like low sci-fi, or even more near sci-fi, where like The Expanse is a good look at something like that. The Expanse says, hey, we're just, at least the early Expanse, we're just looking at what's in our solar system. Hard science fiction, of which I would say that The Expanse is probably our best example on television for a while, right? What can we do within the practical understanding of the universe as we have it right now? Games, we're going to talk about the difference between cyberpunk and transhumanism. What are the differences there? We're going to look at space opera. Some of my favorite science fiction is space opera, which is just this, it is the epic and high fantasy of the science fiction realm. Peter Hamilton writes great space opera. If you haven't read the Commonwealth series, which is a duology, a trilogy, and a duology, or his new, the one that he just finished up recently, the Salvation trilogy. If you like space opera, I don't think there's a better sci-fi writer right now than Peter Hamilton. Ian Banks is another great space opera with the Culture series. And we're going to look at space fantasy. We'll look at planetary romance, of which somebody, I think in the YouTube comments says they prefer, I want to say they said like Sword and Blasters or something like that. I apologize. I'll go back and look at it as opposed to Planetary Romance. But that's our John Carter, Jules Verne style, kind of low sci-fi, but still kind of fantastical elements to it. So those are kind of the genres we're going to be looking at. So some things that occur in some sci-fi. So technology is our root, our basis, our lens through which we look at the human experience going forward. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, my son and I are reading through The Malorian right now, Padre, and we're on the last book, and there's that vision of what actually caused the entire birth of the two prophecies, and it's the destruction of a galaxy because a star explodes when it shouldn't. There's a little bit of science fiction kind of rooted in there. You get the idea that we'll talk about this when we talk about science fantasy, right? Gene Wolfe's Books of the New Sun, I would argue, are science fantasy. Numenera has a lot of science fantasy elements to it from a gaming perspective. So I'll be honest, when it comes to fantasy, I love all genres of fantasy. When it comes to sci-fi, I'm very particular about who I read and what I really enjoy. I think part of that is it's very easy, and this happens in fantasy too. I'm looking right at you, Sanderson. Did I just spark a controversy? Possibly in the chat. Science fiction can very easily focus on the world and the technology and the flash, but not ask any deeper questions about the human condition. Good science fiction does. And so when I find a good sci-fi author who does that, I dig into him a lot. Or her. When it comes to sci-fi gaming, I'm also very, very specific about games that I love. I love Traveler. I love the Infinity role-playing game. We're going to talk about that. Eclipse Phase is another great one. I love transhumanism, which is weird because I disagree basically on every point with transhumanism, but I find it fascinating. Sort of like Lovecraft. I disagree with all of his basic premises of the world, but I still find him fascinating to read. Shadowrun is another game that I really like. Rook, I will fight you about Brandon Sanderson, and Padre brought up kind of one of my reasons why I don't like Sanderson. I don't think Sanderson writes fantasy. I think he writes science fiction. Because he always has to tell you how it works. Though I don't want to spark a controversy. I mean, if you want to have this chat off behind the screen, because that'll take us far afield. But I am just there's one Sanderson story that I like, and it's the short story The Emperor's Soul, and I adore that short story because it actually asks the question, what is a soul? And I think it's beautiful. So some other elements. So that's our main focus of science fiction. Technology, advance it a little bit into the future, and what does that do to the human condition? What are some other things? Well, much like fantasy, we have a lot of elements that appear in some science fiction and don't appear in others. Other worlds, you may have it, you may not. Aliens, you may have it, you may not. I think exploration is at the heart of science fiction because technology allows us to go further, to do more, to explore more. And there's something beautiful about that that heart of exploration that is really deeply embedded in science fiction. Gene Roddenberry, Larry Niven. We forgot to mention Larry Niven, Padre. The Man-Kazin Wars and Ringworld. But we also have strange powers. I mean, when you look at science fiction and fantasy, it's very easy to see how the Venn diagram overlaps in some cases. Psionics, big dumb objects, Rama, for example. The Force. We have these things that exist in science fiction that very much function in the same way as magic, but always seem to they kind of come back and have this grounded experience, right? Even in Foundation, the androids have these strange abilities to push on people's emotions that they don't like. Clark doesn't go deeply into that. I think he may explore it more in the Robot series, but So, yeah, Padre, I haven't read any David Drake's sci-fi. We'll have to discuss that. All right, Rook. I figured that we were kind of on the same page. Even if we weren't, like we can disagree on Sanderson. That's fine. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at: technology, the elements within, and then we're going to follow kind of a similar format. We're going to hit what is the genre. We're going to hit what are the high marks, both in television, film, and stories and gaming. We're going to look over mechanics, what games really exemplify the things we want to tease out of these genres, and then how as a GM and players can we bring this genre to life at our table. I can't wait to talk about Raised by Wolves. I'm really hoping another network picks it up, because Raised by Wolves was one of the best science fiction shows that I have seen in recent memory, and possibly is my favorite sci-fi of the last 2 decades. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It ends on a massive cliffhanger, and HBO canceled it. So here's hoping someone else picks it up. In this weird age of shell games and streaming. Anyway, come join us tonight for the Return to the Diamond Armament. The group for Torg Eternity had just gloried, which is this big event in Torg Eternity, because Zorba smiled for the camera, which was just the most Fet 5 way to get a glory. We'll be back tonight with more Torg, and this weekend we have a lot of iconic material. On Thursday, we're gonna cover the introduction to Cyberpunk here on the channel. On Friday, we're gonna have our Savage Rifts one-shot, and then on Saturday morning, we're gonna do the next installment of the Grand Campaign, looking at factions and how those can really help us run a long-term Grand Campaign. So, yeah, you didn't, Rook. You left a dangling conjunction. Let's see here. What is Grom? Oh, yep, there you go. They're sharing some places to find good sci-fi audiobooks. We'll also talk, I really do think that when we get to science fantasy, the 2 exemplars I really want to talk about or the 3, Books of the New Sun, Star Wars, and the Imperium of the 41st Millennium for Warhammer 40k. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun discussing. That'll end our series, where we kind of look at the 2 genres and see how we can make them kiss. So until next time, thank you all for joining me. It's always good to see everybody. Grom, John, Padre, Rook, Phantom, and everyone who comments online. I try to respond to all the comments. Thank you for that. Thank you to I think it was Wraithing, who possibly corrected my pronunciation of, I always was saying Vason, and he was saying that it could be Vessen is how he has heard it pronounced. And honestly, I'm going to lean into that, because, man, probably knows more about that game than I do. The other thing that we're going to be looking at is, I have just heard that we have Blackbirds and the Zweihander starter set are shipping here this month. And so whenever that comes in, I will interrupt whatever series we are in to do a nice unboxing video and try and get a secondary camera set up so we can watch and look at all of the cool stuff. So, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I will see you all on Thursday for our first episode of Exploring Science Fiction Cyberpunk. Have a good one.